This video is an updated version of the 2016 My Best Unity games list. Since that video is quite old and hasn't aged particularly great, I'll be covering those earlier games as well as any newer ones, and any ones that I might have missed in the original. Project Red was a 2.5D physics platformer. The entire game came from a bug when programming in 3D for the very first time. I added forces for movement onto cubes, but didn't cap any of the forces or rotations. This caused something quite interesting to happen, and that was that the cubes would rotate and bounce when moving, and also allowed you to climb up walls by holding the movement keys. Interestingly, if you swap these to spheres, it would allow you to travel across the ceiling. This game featured local multiplayer, and whilst the version of the video doesn't show it as I no longer have the code, it did have a lot of physics objects that you could mess around with, and was actually quite fun. One additional idea I experimented with, which was an awful idea by the way, was for certain objects to only render on certain players' screens. Totally pointless in split-screen multiplayer. Project Conquer was the first time that I learned about scope. This game was meant to be a Zelda-like game in which the objective was about conquering areas from enemies. Which sounds pretty simple, right? Well, according to my Trello board, I basically wanted every feature possible, including, but not limited to, multiplayer with XP share, building, crafting, merchants and trading, random horde attacks, customization, NPC companions, skill tree, complex combat system, loot rarity system, transportation mechanics like horses and boats, day-night cycle, edible vegetation with different perks, weather, seasons, map system, swimming, stealth system, fishing, missions, throwables, boss battles, resource system, enemy targeting / lock-on system, RPG enemy level system, weapon upgrades, armor, taming, elemental weapon triangle, storage system, painting, and whatever the hell the big patch is. With all that being said, I learned so much from the game. I learned about UI systems, enemy navigation, raycasting, and so many other things. Dual Shooter was a university project that I absolutely love. The assignment was to make a one-button game, which I immediately thought I could get two actions out of by using press and hold variants. So I created Dual Shooter, which is an arcade-style game in which you press the up button to lift your spaceship up, and when it is not being held, it drops down. This lets you shoot up and down, but obviously you can't move left and right with one button. So what I decided to do next was allow the ship to teleport to the other end of the screen, flipped, with the button held down. Once this was implemented, everything clicked into place. I ended up with a game where certain enemies can only be destroyed from certain sides of the screen, whether this was through weak points, having a shield on one side, or my favourite enemy of them all, the enemy with a pink shield that flips when you flip. This means that you have to preemptively fire your shots and then flip so that his shield is facing the wrong way. There were also random events such as meteor storms and a boss battle. Zombie Hospital was my first working game jam game. Originally I did a game jam when I didn't really know how to program properly, which was mainly ended up being like a bunch of slides and pictures of what we wanted it to be essentially. But that was mainly me learning vector math the whole time, so it was still very worthwhile, but we didn't really have anything particularly playable. Anyway, the theme of the game jam was rotting flesh, as it was part of the university's Halloween game jam. It was made with my friend who doesn't program, and so he instead worked on the art and level design, which is honestly 90% of this game. Other than that, you could basically just move, attack, and go through doors. The zombies themselves were based on actual zombie versions of me and my friend, and obviously mine is the one with the huge hair. Racing game. Amazingly unique title, and it was developed to get out of my comfort zone and do a new genre, and also to deal with high-speed collisions, as I'd had issues with objects going through one another in Project Red. It was also the first time I'd created a minimap, and I did this by using an additional camera, but only rendered icons that were floating above the racers at all times, and also rendered the road. This was something I'd learned when only rendering certain things to each player in Project Red. The game also messed around with effects when boosting, such as zooming out the camera and applying a filter. Wizard Spells is another game I really like, though it annoys me that in the trailer I called it a cooperative game when obviously it's player versus player. I believe this was another Halloween game jam, and the theme was rituals. This time I had two teammates, who both didn't do games programming, but instead both worked on art and level design. The game would spawn both players in a room before the match in which they would have 3 mystery boxes spawn. These boxes could be beneficial or detrimental to the player, if mixed in their ritual. Examples could be increasing or decreasing the player's fire rate, doing more or less damage, or making their bullets be goats. Fourth Wall was a university project in which we had to make a game about Boolean logic, in which the player could add and subtract universes, which were basically just rooms, in order to get the solution to get to the door. An example is combining 2 universes to stack 2 boxes so that you can climb up to the door. Another example that comes to mind was a level where you'd have a box in one room and a ramp in another, and you teleported the box into the room, you teleported the ramp, and there was no platform under the ramp anymore because that didn't get teleported as a different type of material. So the ramp would teleport into the other room, hit the box, fall down, and then you could climb up. So just different things to do with adding and subtracting different objects and seeing if it helps you get to the door. Later in the game, the player would be able to get what is essentially like a power glove, and instead of relying on manual switches to move objects between, they could just use the mouse button basically to do this at will. RunTapper was my very first Android game and is therefore very important to me. I also had supportive parents after I'd released this game, and even though it was hardly downloaded, they got me a t-shirt with pictures of the game on and a mug with the original logo on, which I massively appreciate. Anyway, this game is a randomly generated obstacle course in which you tap to teleport through it. There were several pre-built levels, but you could also build your own and share them using the level editor. So these would appear as seeds that you could input into the level player, and then you could play someone else's. You could also customize your cube, and it also had Google achievements and leaderboards. Heads up, if you download the game today, it might be a little buggy, as Google said I need to update it for compliance by November 2nd, and I was in the middle of testing a brand new feature, which is basically a shader that goes over the area the player can move instead of a 2D grid, and that means that you can see how high as well you can move, and it's more accurate. The problem with this is it changes how it renders, so you might have a couple of objects that are invisible or don't quite display right, so heads up on that if you do download it. Color Dome came out shortly after RunTapper's main updates were done, and is another Android game. It was a super simple idea that popped into my head and was developed within only 2 days. The game asks you to rotate the Earth and tap 3 colours randomly placed around the Earth. And each time you get all 3 colours, they randomly generate somewhere else on the Earth. Now, while you're doing this, the game's timer is counting down. If you get to 0, you lose, and you get your score. If you get all 3 colours correct, you get a time bonus, and then you can keep going for longer. Dissertation Project. So, my dissertation project for university, which I got a first in by the way, was a first-person shooter, and the idea for my dissertation was to look at how game controls affect difficulty and enjoyment of a first-person shooter. So I had to get participants to play the game with a normal FPS keyboard and mouse controls, normal FPS controller controls, FPS mobile controls, so that was like on-screen analog sticks and buttons, and an on-rails version for PC and mobile. And the most interesting of them all for me was mouse-only controls. And the mouse-only controls, basically, I think it was something like you would scroll up on the mouse wheel to jump, you would scroll down to reload, you would click in the mouse wheel to start moving, click in to stop moving, and you would basically move where your person was looking with the mouse. And then you had, the normal right click to aim down sights, left click to shoot, and I think there were 2 side mouse buttons that were also mapped. The game was essentially target practice. So you would go through this level, I think you had to crouch under some beams, jump over some beams, shoot some targets, shoot some enemies, and then get to the end. And while you're doing this, the game is timing you. It's taking your accuracy down. It's logging out, how often you jumped, how often you used the aim down sights, how often you swapped from like the pistol to the machine gun, all these different things. So then you combine that with the data from the participants that did like a survey of what they enjoyed, what they found difficult, and they weren't always the same difficult and enjoyment. Sometimes people liked, the wacky stuff like using the mouse with nothing else. So it was an interesting project to do. So VacPac was made for the Game Maker's Toolkit, Game Jam, I believe it was the first one, and the theme was genre without mechanic. And I worked with another friend who again doesn't program, and instead created art and the level design. This was also the first time I used Unity's, cloud collaboration stuff, which was quite interesting. and we decided to do a platformer where you can't jump. Instead, you have to use a vacuum to pull objects towards you, and in order to get around the lack of jump, the player can use the vacuum to pull themselves towards chandeliers, and that will sort of propel you forwards. The aim of the game was to collect all the cobwebs within the mansion in a time limit, and it featured many difficult platforming challenges, and I mean, they were very difficult. There were a couple of checkpoints around, but it was still ridiculously hard. Whilst the game had its issues, I am proud of how it turned out, and we managed to get Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit to play it on a live stream. And he definitely noticed its issues, but I don't think he hated it. I think he thought some bits maybe were kind of interesting. That's what I'm hoping.
That looks more like a torch than a vacuum cleaner, to be honest, but... Whoa! I need like a bit more visual feedback for like how close I can be to the chandeliers to be able to suck on them. Too much talking about sucking on this stream. And... Ooh, hello. What's that? Cobweb. Ah, I got to get cobwebs. 2 out of 20. Bloody hell. Cobweb. Oi. Checkpoints. I mean, it's quite nice. Definitely, yeah, needs some bloody feedback. Okay, what is it with this theme of putting spikes at the top of things to annoy me? It's like everybody's got together to ruin my day. Oh, oh, the vacuum's got limited suck. Limited suck. I love it. Okay. And, oh, okay. Hard, but cool. I like it.
Devil's Diner was done for a weekly game jam, and the theme was bad cooking. In this game, you would work with the devil to create food that people in hell absolutely hate. So in order to make their life misery, you would be given a list of likes and dislikes. You would then use those to go to the menu and create the thing that they would hate the most. So the interesting thing about this was that you had honest people and liars. Now the honest people would be honest about what they hate and what they like. So that was simple enough, you just give them what they say they hate. But the liars would be obviously flipped. They would say that they hate things that they like and they like things that they hate. So you'd have to constantly flip between those. And then just to top it all off, it was also a memory game. So as soon as you accepted an order, it would hide it from you. So you would have to remember what you'd seen. And that was pretty cool. And there was a whole like star system to it. It was also the first time that I'd done tutorials. And I did these little cutscenes between levels. And I thought it turned out quite well. So Looting Simulator was done with a group of 3 programmers. Me and another one had done games programming. And we had the theme of End of the World. In this game, the idea was to loot as much as you could before it was the end of the world. So you would go against someone else in split-screen multiplayer using 2 PlayStation 4 controllers. You'd break windows, grab loot, and you have to escape to the bunker. And if both players escape to the bunker, then it ranks you based on the value of the loot that you've got. And it will drop down onto the stage, and it's pretty cool. If only one of you made it, obviously that person would win by default because they survived. And yeah, it was just pretty cool to do. Hold the Throne is currently my latest Game Jam game, and the theme of this one was You're the Enemy. So to go along with this, instead of like playing as the bad guy, I decided to spin on its head a little bit, and I made it so that the bullets the player fired would, as normal, kill the enemies. But the bullets could also hurt the player, so there was a bit of friendly fire going on. And just to make this even better, when you shoot and it hits the end of the screen, it would then wrap onto the other side. So you could shoot yourself in the back, essentially. This was a pretty cool thing to do, and it was pretty fun. And yeah, it was just basically a bunch of enemies coming on. You shoot them, kill the boss, you win, and you get points at the end. And this was the first time that I'd used the high-definition render pipeline in Unity. And I also did all the art in Sprite for the first time. And I think it turned out pretty well. And that is all of my main Unity games up until October 2020. I hope you enjoyed, and make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it. And I also stream on Twitch, so if you want to go check out Twitch, there's a link in the description. Thanks for watching.